My sister had the nerve to call me a freeloader while living rent-free in the very house I bought. That was the last straw. I cut her off completely. But I didn't stop there. The next decision I made turned her entire world upside down. I'm Megan, 34 years old, a single mother to the most incredible kid on the planet, Ethan, who just turned 10. He's my whole world, my anchor, my light, the reason I keep pushing forward every single day. I work as a project manager in Austin, and I make a solid living, pulling in about $280,000, 0 cents, a year now. Sounds comfortable, right? But let me tell you, getting here wasn't just hard, it was a nightmare and a climb straight out of hell, if I'm being honest. So let me rewind a bit, because this story doesn't make sense without understanding where I came from. To put it bluntly, my family was a chaotic mess. Dysfunctional doesn't even scratch the surface. Growing up, it was like we lived in a two-tiered system. There was the golden child, and then there was me. My younger sister Amber could have set the house on fire and somehow ended up being praised for her passion. Meanwhile, I was practically invisible unless they needed something. She was always the talented one, the blessed child, the one with the artistic flair and the unlimited support. Me, I was just the backdrop to her spotlight. I still remember it like it happened yesterday. I was 19 and had just received my acceptance letter from UC Berkeley. I was bouncing off the walls with excitement. I was the first in our family to get into a top-tier university. It felt like my whole future was opening up right in front of me. I ran into the living room, waving that letter like it was a golden ticket. But instead of cheers or hugs, I was met with stiff faces and uncomfortable silence. "Sit down, Megan," my dad said, not even looking me in the eye. I thought maybe they were planning some surprise graduation gift or a celebratory dinner. How naive I was. My mom looked at me calmly, like she was delivering the weather forecast. "We used your college fund for Amber," she said. I blinked, waiting for her to laugh and say she was joking. But no, she went on. "She got accepted into this exclusive arts program in New York. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance." My entire college fund. Gone. Every penny. My jaw literally dropped. "You used all of it? For her?" They nodded, completely unbothered. "You can take out student loans," my dad added, like it was no big deal. "This is a special moment for Amber. We couldn't let it pass her by." That was it for me. I realized in that moment that I was never going to matter to them, not unless it was in service to Amber's dreams. So that night, I gathered every belonging I had, crammed it into my beat-up Honda Civic, and left. No one came outside, no one stopped me, not a word. I drove to Austin, slept in my car for a few nights, and eventually found a hole-in-the-wall apartment I could barely afford. From there, it was a long grind. I juggled 3 miserable jobs: barista in the morning, data entry in the afternoon, waitress at night, while taking classes at a local community college. Some nights I crashed in the break room because I didn't have enough money for bus fare. I scavenged half-eaten sandwiches and leftover fries when no one was watching. I wasn't proud of it, but try starving for 3 days and see where your pride gets you. After years of struggling, I finally got my associate's degree and landed a junior position at a small tech startup. That's where I met Jason, Ethan's father. He was charming, intelligent, and for a while made me feel seen. We got married a year after dating, and Ethan was born not long after. For a short while things were good, normal, happy. Until, of course, I discovered the texts between him and his 22-year-old intern. I didn't scream or cry. I just packed his belongings into black garbage bags, lined them up at the door, and told him to make a choice: walk away on his own, or watch his stuff fly off our 3rd-story balcony. To his credit, he stepped up in the one way that mattered: child support. He's never missed a payment, shows up for Ethan's birthday and Christmas, and that's more than enough. For the past 8 years, it's been just me and Ethan against the world. And honestly, we make a great team. Ethan is this incredible mix of sweetness and brilliance. He's in the gifted program, plays forward on his soccer team, and builds elaborate Lego cities with functioning bridges and towers that put architects to shame. Every night, even though he can read on his own, I read to him before bed. It's our ritual, our moment to unwind, to connect, to just be. I hustled hard, grinding through promotion after promotion, until I finally managed to buy a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood with great schools. Last year felt like I had finally made it. I had carved out a life entirely my own, safe, stable, and full of love. No family needed. But that peace was shattered with a single phone call. It was a Tuesday. I'd just wrapped up a long Zoom meeting with clients when my phone rang, An unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Megan, it's your mother. My stomach twisted into a knot. 15 years. 15 long, silent years. Not a single word from her since the day I drove off into the unknown with nothing but a duffel bag and $20 in cash. Mom, I said flatly, no emotion, just acknowledging. You need to come home. Your father's in the hospital. Her voice trembled, and for a moment, just a second, I felt a flicker of something, maybe sympathy, maybe old wounds. But I wasn't about to fall back into that trap. What happened? I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. Had a heart attack. He's stable now, but... Her voice trailed off. Here it comes. We're about to lose the house. The bank is foreclosing in 2 weeks. And there it was, the real reason she called. They didn't miss me. They didn't suddenly grow a conscience. They needed money. Of course they did. Why else would I ever hear from them? I'm sorry to hear about Dad, I said. And strangely, I meant it. But I don't see what this has to do with me, I said coldly. Megan, please, just come home. We need to talk in person. I should have shut it down right then and there, should have ended the call without hesitation. But there was something in her voice, an edge of fear, or maybe genuine desperation, that slipped past my defenses. And if I'm being brutally honest, there was also a small, quiet part of me that wanted to go back. Not for them, but to show them exactly what they lost when they discarded me like yesterday's trash. To stand in front of them, successful and unshakable, after all the pain they caused. I'll think about it, I said, and with that I hung up. Later that night, after Ethan was sound asleep, I sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, gazing up at the stars. The air was still, heavy with summer warmth. My thoughts spun in every direction. Should I go? Should I stay away and protect the peace I'd worked so hard to build? I pulled out my phone and messaged Tara, my best friend since forever. They only called because they need something, she texted back instantly. You don't owe them a damn thing. She wasn't wrong, but still, the thought nagged at me. What if my father really was on the brink of death? What if this was the last chance I'd ever have to see him? And, more importantly, could I walk away from the opportunity to finally flip the narrative and hold the power they never gave me? The next morning, I arranged to work remotely for a few days. I packed up our things, told Ethan we were taking a quick trip, and loaded the car. I wasn't going back, for their sake. I was doing this for me, for the closure I didn't know I needed. The drive from Austin to San Antonio was just under 2 hours, but with every mile, my stomach tightened. Anxiety twisted in my chest like a knot pulled too tight. Ethan sat beside me quietly, absorbed in a game on his tablet, the silence between us broken only by the soft click of his fingers on the screen. Mom? Where are we going exactly? He finally asked, eyes still glued to his game. We're going to meet your grandparents, I said, the words feeling foreign and awkward on my tongue. I have grandparents? His eyes snapped up to meet mine, wide and incredulous. You never talk about them. That's when it hit me like a truck. My parents didn't even know their own grandson existed. A whole decade of his life had passed, and they'd missed every second of it. No phone calls, no letters, not even a stray birthday card. They had a grandson and chose not to know him. What kind of people do that? When we pulled up to the house, I didn't get out right away. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the faded home where I'd spent so many painful years. It looked much smaller than I remembered. The paint was chipped and peeling, the grass out front waist-high, one of the window shutters dangling precariously on a rusted hinge. A shadow of the tidy, middle-class house I'd once called home. The front door creaked open before I'd even reached the steps. My mother stood there, smaller than I remembered, with a crown of gray where once there had been thick black curls. Her face was creased, not just by age but by stress and weariness. For a fleeting second I felt a pang of something. Pity, maybe. But it vanished the moment her eyes landed on Ethan. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she breathed. My father shuffled into view behind her, leaning heavily on a cane. He looked like a ghost of the man I used to know. Shoulders hunched, skin pale, eyes sunken. But even in his frailty, his gaze locked onto Ethan with a spark of something I couldn't quite place. This is my son, Ethan, I said, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Ethan, these are your grandparents. Suddenly, like someone had flipped a switch, they transformed. Their eyes lit up, and their voices went up an octave. My goodness, look at you, you've grown so big. Do you like baseball? I used to coach Little League. My father was all smiles. You're the spitting image of your mother when she was your age. It was like watching a performance. They slipped into the roles of doting grandparents with alarming ease. And yet, these were the same people who hadn't cared enough to ask if I had children, who'd cut me out of their lives for over a decade. "Let's skip the reunion act and talk about why I'm here," I said flatly, snapping them out of their charade. My mother's smile faltered. She nodded stiffly and gestured for us to come inside. The interior was just as run down as the outside. Cracked linoleum floors, fading wallpaper, the smell of mildew hanging in the air. I took a seat while Ethan sat quietly beside me, still processing everything. My father cleared his throat and began, voice raspy. "Amber took out a sizable loan to launch her own design studio. It didn't work out. We mortgaged the house to help her get back on her feet, but the debt caught up. Now, the bank's foreclosing. We need $200,000 to save it." I stared at him, stunned not by the number but by what he said next. "That's not much for you now, is it, Megan?" The gall. Like I owed them. Like the years I spent homeless, overworked, and forgotten never happened. Before I could even find the words, the front door burst open, and there she was, Amber, dressed like she walked off a runway, her perfectly coiffed hair framing her flawless face, designer bag slung carelessly over one shoulder. Well, she said, her tone laced with venom. "Look who finally decided to show up. Come to play savior, Megan?" I bit back the sharp words that rose to my lips. "I'm here to understand the situation." Amber snorted. "The situation is that Mom and Dad are losing everything thanks to a predatory bank system, and you, Miss Tech Exec, are the only one who can fix it." Her voice dripped with resentment, as if my success was a fluke, some cosmic accident I didn't deserve, as if I hadn't bled for every inch of it. I took a breath, calm and steady. "I'll think about it. You'll have my answer in 3 days." I booked a hotel room downtown for me and Ethan. No way was I spending a single night under that roof. That evening, I called my friend Jessica, a sharp-as-nails real estate attorney. After I explained everything, she paused and then said, "Let me get this straight. They stole your education fund, cut you out of their lives for 15 years, and now they expect you to bail them out?" "Pretty much," I said. "And you're actually considering it?" "Not for them. But if I don't help and they lose everything, will I regret it? Especially with Dad's health?" There was silence on the line, and then she said, "Buy the house outright. Put it in your name, let them stay, but only if they sign a legal agreement to pay back every cent within 5 years. If they don't, it stays yours." It was brilliant, a way to help, but on my terms, not theirs. Amber wouldn't get another chance to bleed them dry, not if I had anything to do with it. "Draw up the papers," I told Jessica. "I'll return in 3 days with my decision." Those 3 days were surreal. I tried to focus on Ethan to create some good memories during what was supposed to be a quick trip. We did all the classic San Antonio tourist things, walked the Riverwalk, ate way too much Tex-Mex, took goofy selfies in front of the Alamo. On the surface, everything looked picture perfect, but my thoughts never stopped racing. Every quiet moment brought back the same debate. Should I just cut them off again and go back to my peaceful life? Or should I help, but only on terms that gave me control? A small, not-so-noble part of me even looked forward to the moment I could present them with the cold, hard truth, that I held all the cards now. I wanted to see their faces when they realized I had the power, not them. 3 days later, I returned to my parents' house with Jessica by my side, a manila folder in her hand containing the contract that would change everything. My parents were seated on the faded floral couch, visibly tense. Amber was lounging in the recliner, acting like she didn't have a care in the world, scrolling through her phone without even looking up. "I've made my decision," I announced as I sat down opposite them. Jessica opened the folder and placed the contract on the coffee table with a soft but firm thud. "I'll pay off the $200,000 0-cents mortgage," I said. "The house will legally be in my name. You can continue living here, but only as tenants. If you want to regain ownership, you'll have to pay me back the full amount within 5 years. If not, the house remains mine permanently." The silence that followed was thick, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mother's face crumpled as she began to cry quietly. My father sat back heavily, his face pale, the lines on his forehead deepening with every second. But Amber? She was volcanic. "You've got to be kidding me," she spat, jumping to her feet. "You're making our parents pay rent in their own home? What kind of heartless monster are you?" I didn't flinch. I stood, slowly and deliberately, and began gathering the contract papers. "Forget it then. I'm sure the bank will be more than happy to take it off your hands." "Wait," my father croaked, his voice shaking as he reached out a trembling hand. "We accept. We'll sign." Amber whirled to face him, aghast. "Dad, no, you can't be serious." "We don't have a choice, Amber," he said quietly. "The bank takes the house in 2 weeks otherwise." And just like that, it was done. Jessica handled the paperwork with the kind of precision that made me grateful I'd called her. 2 weeks later, the house was legally mine. My parents didn't fight it. They seemed subdued, almost defeated, resigned to this new reality. Part of me felt bad for them, but then I remembered what they'd done, how they'd stolen my future, handed it to Amber on a silver platter, and left me to fend for myself in a world that chews up young women without support systems. I had survived, I had thrived, and now they were living in a house they only kept because I gave them a second chance. On my terms. I returned to Austin thinking that chapter was closed, that I could move on. That I was wrong. About a month later, I decided to drop by unannounced. Something just didn't sit right with me. I'd been paying the utilities and insurance on the house and hadn't heard a peep about repaying anything. I told myself it was just a courtesy check-in, but the truth? I was suspicious. When I pulled up to the driveway, there was a rusted motorcycle parked on the gravel. I didn't recognize it. Warning bells went off in my head. I knocked. No answer. So I used my key. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me like a punch. Pungent, unmistakable. Weed. Strong. I followed the sound of laughter to the kitchen. There they were, my mother stirring something on the stove, my father sipping coffee at the table, Amber perched by the counter. And someone new. A guy. Tattoos up and down his arms, a man bun, wearing a hoodie that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks, blowing clouds of vape smoke like it was his job. My mother turned, startled. "Megan, we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I replied, scanning the stranger. "Who's this?" Amber slinked over to him, sliding her arm around his waist like she was presenting a prize. "This is Ryan? My boyfriend? Ryan, this is my sister, the one I told you about?" Ryan gave me a once-overs, his gaze crawling over me like something sticky. "So, you're the corporate sellout. Nice to finally meet you." I turned to my mother, ignoring him completely. I didn't agree to let Amber and her boyfriend move in. "It's just temporary," she said quickly, a nervous smile on her lips. "Until they get back on their feet. Ryan's between jobs right now, and they couldn't afford their apartment." Of course. Amber wrecks her business, and instead of hustling like the rest of us, she crawls back to the nest, dragging along a loser who smells like weed and ego. "Not my problem," I said coldly. "They have 2 weeks to find somewhere else." Ryan laughed, a sharp mocking sound. "You can't kick us out. This is your parents' house." "Actually," I said, meeting his gaze dead on. "It's my house now. And yes, I can." Later that night, I was in the guest room reviewing project briefs when I left to use the bathroom. That's when Ryan appeared, cornering me in the hallway. He reeked weed, sweat, and bad decisions. "You think you're so much better than everyone else," he slurred. "Single mom with a cushy job. Bet you slept your way to the top." I tried to step around him. He blocked my path. "Move," I said. "Or what?" He leaned in, breath rancid. "You gonna call Daddy? Oh wait, you can't. He's downstairs, hoping his stuck-up daughter doesn't make him homeless." "Get out of my face, Ryan, and get out of my house. 2 weeks. He smirked, eyes glinting with malice. "Your kid seems nice. Be a real shame if he picked up some habits from Uncle Ryan. Maybe I'll teach him how to roll his first joint." That was it. I shoved him back, hard. He stumbled into the wall, startled. "You threaten my son again," I said in a low, icy voice, "and I will have you arrested so fast your man bun won't know what hit it. 2 weeks. Or I call the sheriff." I went straight back to the guest room and called Jessica. "I need eviction papers. For Amber and her dirtbag boyfriend. Now." The next morning, I headed back to Austin. My blood was still boiling, my mind replaying every second of that hallway encounter. I tried to pour myself into work, focus on Ethan, and find some peace. But the storm wasn't over. Not even close. A few days later, during a virtual team meeting, my phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree. Calls, texts, emails, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Something had happened. "Are you okay? Have you seen what Amber posted? Everyone's talking about it." That was the text I received just as I wrapped up a client meeting. My heart dropped into my stomach. I excused myself from the call and opened my phone. Within seconds, I saw it. There it was, plastered all over Facebook, a post from Amber, complete with an old photo of me and Ethan from years ago, one I'd never shared publicly. Above the picture was a long, unhinged rant. "Meet my sister Megan," it began. the cold-hearted corporate witch who abandoned our family and is now making our elderly parents homeless. After 15 years of radio silence, she suddenly reappeared, not to help, but to snatch the house we grew up in right out from under our parents. She's demanding they pay her back every cent, or she'll evict them, while she lives it up in a fancy mansion, raking in 6 figures. It got worse. She's a terrible mother, too. Her son is being raised by strangers while she chases her career. She's a toxic leech who uses people, a textbook narcissist. This is what happens when you worship money over family. I stared at the screen, stunned. The comment section was an even bigger disaster. It had exploded with responses, some from people I hadn't spoken to since high school, others from distant family members, and even a few of my parents' nosy neighbors. There were people calling me every name in the book: monster, snake, ungrateful brat, and of course, gold digger. A few especially bold commenters had even tagged my employer, clearly hoping to get me fired, or at least humiliated. But as disgusting as those lies were, what enraged me the most, what made my vision blur and my blood run cold, was that she had dragged Ethan into it. She used his photo, without my permission, and exposed him to this vile spectacle. That crossed a line I could never forgive. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Ethan's school. My chest tightened. My hands shook as I answered. "Miss Patterson, this is Mrs. Rodriguez from the front office," the voice said gently. "Ethan's very upset. Apparently some of his classmates have been showing him social media posts about your family." My legs almost gave out. "I'll be there right away," I said, already grabbing my keys. I dropped everything, told my boss there was a family emergency, and raced across town. My mind raced with every worst-case scenario. What had he seen? What had they said to him? When I arrived at the school, Ethan was in the counselor's office, curled up in a chair, his eyes red and puffy. He looked up as I came in. "Mom," he whispered, voice small and broken. "Why is Aunt Amber saying those things about us online?" He buried his face in my shoulder as I knelt to hug him. I held him tight, brushing his hair gently. "My friend Jake showed me the post," he said quietly. "She said you're a bad mom." I pulled back and looked him straight in the eyes. "Do you think I'm a bad mom?" He shook his head without hesitation. "No. You're the best mom ever." "Then that's all that matters," I told him. "Sometimes adults act out when they don't get their way. What Amber did was wrong. None of the things she said are true. She's angry and she made a choice to hurt us with lies." I took Ethan home and called Jessica as soon as we walked through the door. "I want them gone," I told her, "all of them. Today." "Whoa, slow down," she said. "What happened?" I filled her in on everything: the post, the comments, Ethan's school. Jessica took a breath. "Okay, I can have eviction papers for Amber and Ryan ready by this afternoon, but your parents?" "I'm not evicting them," I clarified. "Just the parasites living off of them." That afternoon, Jessica drove down from Austin to meet me. We returned to the house, documents in hand. When we knocked, Ryan answered the door, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed. It was 2 p.m. "What do you want now?" he sneered, clearly annoyed at being disturbed during his busy schedule of doing absolutely nothing. Jessica stepped forward, the embodiment of calm legal force. "Amber Patterson and Ryan Daniels, you are being served with formal eviction notices. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises or we'll proceed with eviction through the court system." Ryan laughed like she'd told a joke. "You can't be serious." Amber appeared behind him, arms crossed, eyes full of defiance. "This is my parents' house. You can't kick me out." "Actually, it's my house," I said, "and yes, I can." I handed her another envelope, this one a cease and desist letter Jessica had prepared. "You're also being ordered to remove all social media posts mentioning me and my son immediately," I added. "Use his image again without my permission, and you'll be facing a lawsuit for defamation and exploitation of a minor." Amber's eyes darkened as she stepped toward me, fists clenched. "You think you're so powerful?" she spat. "You and your little bastard are just leeches. A pathetic single mom who got dumped and thinks she's tough. But deep down, you're still a loser, still a failure." Something snapped. Before I could stop myself, I slapped her. Hard. The sound cracked through the room. Amber stumbled, eyes wide, hand flying to her cheek. Ryan lunged, but Jessica moved between us like a shield. "You can insult me all you want," I said, voice steady as steel. "But if you ever mention my son again, I will make sure you regret it every day for the rest of your miserable life." My mother was sobbing in the corner. My father looked like the wind had been knocked out of him. Ryan was glaring daggers but didn't make another move. Jessica laid the papers on the coffee table. "Sign." They did. Ryan slammed the pen down after scribbling his name. Amber muttered curses under her breath as she packed up her things. Ryan grabbed a duffel bag and stormed out. Amber followed, but not before pausing at the doorway. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I'll make sure the world knows what kind of person you really are." I didn't flinch. Try me. After they left, I sat with my parents in the now eerily quiet living room. My mother wiped at her face with a crumpled tissue. "Why did you have to do that?" she asked. "She's your sister." "Biology doesn't make someone family," I replied flatly. "Her actions do, and she crossed a line the moment she used my son to manipulate people." My father let out a long, tired sigh. "We just wanted to help her get back on her feet." "That's always been the problem," I said. "You help her even when it hurts everyone else." I stayed long enough to ensure Ryan and Amber had left for good. Then I drove back to Austin. The ride home was a whirlwind of emotion. Anger, frustration, sadness, but also something new, relief. Like for the first time in forever, I'd truly stood up for myself. But of course, Amber wasn't done. In the following weeks, she made good on her threat. The online smear campaign escalated. Amber didn't just stop at Facebook. No, she took her personal vendetta against me to an entirely new level. She launched a full-blown smear campaign across every major social media platform. Instagram, Twitter, even TikTok. She branded it my sister, the monster, turning it into a series where she posted dramatic videos and storytime rants filled with wild exaggerations, half-truths, and flat-out lies. According to Amber's warped narrative, I was a soulless corporate automaton who had abandoned our family, stolen our childhood home from our elderly parents, and thrown them to the wolves. She called me a neglectful mother who dumped my son on nannies so I could climb the corporate ladder and chase power. She painted herself and Ryan as victims, unfairly evicted and now homeless because of my greed and cruelty. Never mind that they were crashing at his buddy's apartment for free. That part didn't make it into her sob stories. Her videos were filled with fake tears and dramatic pauses, all expertly calculated for maximum sympathy. Clips of her weeping while soft music played in the background, spliced with grainy filters to make her look fragile and victimized. The manipulation was almost artistic in its effort. And unfortunately, it worked. At least for a little while. Some of my coworkers saw the posts and looked at me differently during meetings. A few clients brought it up during calls, awkwardly tiptoeing around the subject as if I were about to snap. One of Ethan's teachers even pulled me aside during school pickup to ask if everything at home was safe and stable. And then, the worst happened. I was summoned to my boss's office. Someone emailed the company about allegations of elder abuse, she said, eyes narrowing over the rim of her glasses. Panic flared in my chest, but I stayed calm. I explained everything, laid out the situation, and even showed her the legal documents Jessica had prepared. My boss listened carefully, then leaned back in her chair and sighed. "Family drama, huh? Been there," she said, rolling her eyes. "Handle your business. Just make sure it doesn't interfere with ours." I nearly cried from relief. But what crushed me the most wasn't the false accusations or the social media circus. It was Ethan, having to explain all of this mess to my 10-year-old son. He came home from school one day with a confused, hurt look in his eyes. "Mom, some kid said Aunt Amber's telling people you're mean to Grandpa and Grandma, that you're not a good mom. Jake showed me one of her videos." Hearing those words from him felt like a knife to the chest. I sat down beside him and pulled him into a hug. "Sometimes, buddy, adults get angry and say things that aren't true. Aunt Amber's very upset right now, and she's making choices that hurt others because she doesn't know how else to deal with her feelings." "But why is she mad at you?" he asked, eyes searching mine for answers. "How do you explain decades of dysfunction, favoritism, betrayal, and pain to a child?" I thought for a moment and said, "Sometimes people think life should be fair, and when things don't go their way, they look for someone to blame, even if that person didn't do anything wrong." He nodded slowly, accepting the explanation with a maturity that surprised me. Kids understand more than we give them credit for. Meanwhile, my parents had settled into the new arrangement. They were quiet, polite, and careful not to mention Amber at all. We maintained a kind of tense civility. I didn't ask for rent, and I didn't kick them out, but they understood the boundaries. Every month I brought Ethan to visit, not because I'd forgiven them, but because I wanted Ethan to have a connection to his grandparents, even if that connection was flawed and complicated. The thing about online drama is that it burns hot and fast. Within a few months, Amber's campaign began to fizzle. By the third month, her engagement numbers were tanking. People had moved on to the next viral scandal. By the sixth, she'd stopped posting entirely. My mother mentioned one day in passing that Amber and Ryan had broken up. Apparently he'd cheated on her with a bartender. Karma's got a sense of humor. Last I heard, Amber was working as a receptionist at a hair salon in Houston. Not exactly the bohemian art queen my parents had mortgaged their lives for. I won't pretend I didn't feel a little smug when I heard that. But just as things began to calm down, the storm returned. It happened about 7 months after I evicted Amber and Ryan. I was fast asleep when my phone rang at 3:00 a.m. My heart leapt into my throat. It was my mom, her voice frantic and cracking with hysteria. "Your father? He collapsed. The ambulance just left. We're at Methodist Hospital." I jumped out of bed, heart pounding. I called my neighbor, asked her to stay with Ethan, then drove through the dark, empty highways to San Antonio, adrenaline pushing me forward like a machine. When I arrived, I found my mother alone in the waiting room, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. I sat beside her and asked, "Where's Amber?" "I called her," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "She said she'd try to come tomorrow if she can get off work." Translation: her father might be dying and she couldn't be bothered to come immediately. Classic Amber. Hours passed. The doctors finally came out and told us Dad had suffered a major heart attack. He was stable but would need bypass surgery and a long recovery. I stayed with my mother until sunrise, then drove back to the house to shower and grab a change of clothes. That's when I noticed it. Bills piled high on the kitchen counter. Most of them stamped past due or final notice. When I confronted my mother about them, she broke down in tears. "We've been trying to make the payments to you," she said between sobs. "But with your father's medical bills from the first heart attack, we just—" I stood there, arms crossed, unmoved. I'd seen this act before, and I wasn't playing into it this time. This is the same woman who stole my college fund without blinking, I thought. The same woman who never once called to ask if I had food when I was sleeping in my car. "It's funny," I said coldly. "You only seem to remember I exist when you need something." She looked up, tears streaking her face. "Megan, please, we're really struggling." "And where's Amber?" I asked, flipping through the stack of unpaid bills. "Why isn't she helping you? She's the reason you're in this mess." "She's going through a rough time," my mother said weakly. Of course she was. Amber was always going through something, always the victim, always their precious priority. I spent the rest of the morning going through their finances. It was even worse than I feared. They were barely scraping by on Social Security and a meager pension. Medical bills had wiped out their savings. Then I found it. A receipt, buried under the pile. A $500 0-cents birthday gift they had sent to Amber just a month earlier. They were skipping their payments to me, but still sending Amber cash. I slapped the receipt down on the table in front of my mother. "You're struggling, but you can afford to send Amber $500 0-cents birthday gifts?" She looked genuinely embarrassed for the first time. It was her 30th birthday. We wanted to do something special. "You know, when was the last time you remembered my birthday?" I said, my voice sharp. "Never. Not once in 15 years. "That's not fair, Megan. We sent you cards." I stopped in my tracks, hand on the doorknob, purse slung over my shoulder. I turned back slowly, my voice low and sharp. "No, you didn't. Don't lie to me. You never sent a single thing. Not to me, and certainly not to your grandson." I was done playing along with their revisionist history. I called the hospital one last time to check on my dad's post-op status, confirmed that he was stable, then was told to leave. My mother trailed behind me to the door, a nervous energy in her steps. "Please, Megan," she begged. "What about the payments? We really can't afford them right now." I turned to face her, not unkind but unwavering. "The deal stands. I'm not being manipulated. Not again." Her expression shifted, morphing from desperation into something colder, more familiar. Her lips tightened, and then she said it. "But your father—" "My father?" I interrupted. "The man who sat there silently while you used my entire college fund for Amber's pipe dream? That father?" Her face hardened even more. I could almost see the moment she chose guilt over accountability. "We gave you life, Megan. We raised you. Don't you think you owe us something for that?" And there it was, the old game, the familiar guilt tactics. The implication was that I was somehow indebted to them for doing the bare minimum expected of parents. It was astonishing how easily she defaulted to emotional blackmail. "I don't owe you anything," I replied, my tone flat, resolute. "You're not out on the street. You have a home you still live in because of me. But I'm not your ATM anymore." That conversation could have ended on an uglier note. I chose not to escalate it further. I turned and walked out, the door closing behind me with finality. In the weeks that followed, I hired a home health aide for my dad, not because I felt compelled to support them, and certainly not out of obligation. I did it because it was the right thing to do for him. I didn't take time off work or rearrange my life. I'd sacrificed enough already. Amber, for her part, showed up at the hospital exactly once during my father's recovery. She stayed a grand total of 2 hours, took some staged selfies next to his hospital bed, no doubt for her social media feed, and left after claiming she had a massive deadline and couldn't stick around. I avoided her during that brief window, and counted my blessings that our paths didn't cross. Sometimes, I wondered if I was being too harsh, but every time that thought crept in, I reminded myself of the look on my mother's face the day she told me my college fund had been rerouted to Amber. I remembered crying alone in my freezing apartment, while Amber posted pictures of her artist life in New York. I remembered working 3 jobs and eating customer leftovers while they gushed over Amber's gallery openings. I remembered every Christmas alone, every birthday as forgotten. Every year, they didn't ask if I was okay, or if Ethan was even alive. The payment plan stayed, business was business. They made their choices, I made mine. And then last week, everything flipped again. I was in the middle of presenting a major proposal to a prospective client when my assistant rushed into the room and handed me a note. Emergency call from Ethan's school. My stomach dropped. I left immediately and drove faster than I should have. When I arrived, I found Ethan sitting in the principal's office with a split lip on his face and a swelling bruise beneath his eye. The other boy involved was sitting nearby, with an ice pack and a bloody nose. "What happened?" I asked, my voice tight. The principal explained that the other boy had been teasing Ethan, repeating old gossip from the social media storm Amber had ignited months earlier, saying I was a monster who stole her parents' house and didn't love her family. Ethan told him to stop multiple times. When the kid didn't, Ethan punched him. Both boys were suspended for 3 days. In the car on the way home, Ethan asked, "Am I in trouble?" "Fighting isn't the answer," I said gently, "but I understand why you were angry." That night, after he went to bed, I finally gave in to the curiosity that had been gnawing at me for weeks. I Googled Amber. And what I found was infuriating. She'd rebranded herself as a family trauma recovery coach. She was using our story, a grotesquely warped self-pitying version, to sell coaching packages online. She had a website, a TikTok account, and even an ebook titled Toxic Sisters: Healing from Family Betrayal. She'd turned our private pain into a profit stream. The next day, I got a text from my mom. "Amber wants to talk to you. She says it's important." Against every instinct I agreed. Not to make peace, not to reconnect, but to shut this madness down once and for all. We met at a quiet little coffee shop. She looked different. Casual clothes, no designer brands, her hair in a messy bun, but her eyes still had that calculating glint. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she started. "About how to turn our family into a paycheck?" I shot back. She winced. "You saw that, huh?" We argued for a while, rehashing old fights, nothing new. But then she dropped a bombshell. "I'm broke, Megan, completely broke. The coaching thing, it's not working. Ryan maxed out all my credit cards before he left. I'm in over my head." I blinked. "You've got to be kidding me." "I don't know what to do," she whispered, real tears in her eyes. "I need help." "What do you want?" I asked coldly. "Money?" "No. A job, anything. I'll start at the bottom. Can't you help me get something at your company?" I stared at her, genuinely stunned. After everything she'd done, the lies, the slander, dragging my child into her mess, she wanted me to hand her a lifeline? "I'll take everything down," she said quickly. "The videos, the ebook, the posts, all of it." I studied her face. The desperation was real, but so was the selfishness. "Take everything down first," I said. "Every post, every lie, every dollar you made off our pain. Then send me proof. After that, and only after that, we'll talk about work." "But I need money now." "Not my problem," I said flatly. "You made this mess, you clean it up." To my surprise, she followed through. Within a week, every video, post, and reference to me and Ethan vanished. She sent screenshots as proof. I knew someone who ran a small marketing firm in Dallas, an entry-level job barely above minimum wage. I told him the truth, all of it. He agreed to interview her, with no promises. She texted, "Thank you." I didn't reply. This wasn't forgiveness, it was a strategy. Better she have some income than crawl back to my parents and bleed them dry again. As for my parents, Dad was home now, recovering slowly. The bills kept coming, and the subtle hints started again. Maybe we could revise the agreement, my mom texted one evening. Not happening. I'm not their emergency fund. A few days later, she asked something new. Can Ethan come stay with us for the weekend? I shut that down immediately. There was no hesitation. The idea of Ethan spending an unsupervised weekend with the very people who had ignored him for a decade. Absolutely not. They barely know him, and I don't trust them not to poison his mind with their twisted version of our family's story. They've rewritten history in their favor so many times, they probably believe their own lies at this point, and I refuse to let them manipulate my son the way they tried to manipulate me for years. The house? It's still legally mine, and that's not changing. I've made it crystal clear. Keep making the agreed-upon payments or start packing. I'm not bending, not modifying, not relenting. This is a contract, not a favor. Business is business. Will Amber hold up her end of the deal? I doubt it. She's never experienced the full weight of consequences. She's always had someone to bail her out, smooth over her failures, shield her from the fallout. But not anymore. As for my parents, I'm done hoping they'll change. They're still the same people who turned their backs on me, just older now, and more desperate. But that's not my problem anymore. I've spent too much time, too much energy, too much heartache trying to fix what they broke. No more. My focus now is where it should have always been. Ethan and my career, the two things in my life that have given back what I've put in. They're my pride, my peace, my future. So that's it. That's the story of how my sister and my parents tried to use me one last time, and how I finally stopped cleaning up their messes. No more guilt, no more apologies, just freedom.